Well, it's finally time, everyone. It's time for the official Crimson Rosso Persona 5 Royal Palace ranking video, where we rank palaces from worst to best in a vain attempt to convince people my bad takes are actually good for once in my miserable life, but instead then go to bed depressed that people aren't agreeing with them. So this should be fun. But before we begin, I do have to say that this will possibly be my last Persona 5 video for a while. I will come back to make more videos someday, but I want to focus on the other games for videos as well. Got a Persona 3 tips and tricks video planned soon to kick it off. But enough about that. If you want to, drop me a like and a sub, and with that shameless plug done, let's get started. It shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody that the Okumura Palace ranks as the worst palace on this list. His palace has gone down in infamy for being an absolute slog and a half to get through, and for very good reason. For starters, a giant chunk of his palace is a lot of running back and forth to complete tedious objectives. The best example of this is when you need to collect key cards in order to progress, which requires you to use stealth to learn what they like. You know, not so bad at first. But then, once you learn, you have to go to the 3 robot workers stationed around the floor, and hope you pick the right one. Because if you don't, you have to run all the way over to the right one, dealing with enemies that can drain your SP or health, resulting in having to either use up your resources or just leave the palace and waste a day. They also make you do it more than once. For reasons, I guess? Even worse is the level isn't even really all that interesting to look at or explore. It's just a mass of gray, rusty, or whatever dull building colors they could think of. There's barely any variety whatsoever in any part of the level, making it a chore to both look at and traverse through. The boss fight also doesn't save it either. It's one half fighting the same robot enemies you've beaten the shit out before, and the other half beating up both Shadow Okumura and Shadow Haru, where they wear some really stupid space outfits and attack like generic enemies. There's also a timer that's beyond meaningless with how easily you beat the enemies there. There's just not a single redeeming feature about this palace, other than the fact that you unlock Haru. It's a terrible level that Royal didn't really do all that much to fix. Time to follow up one greedy bastard with another. The Kaneshiro level, while not as irredeemably bad as Okumura's, is still not able to cross the threshold into good territory. First off, its design. It's almost kind of impressive how a level focused on a bank floating in the fucking sky is as boring as this is. They constantly just keep going for the most generic bank designs I've ever seen, with a bunch of boring ass waiting rooms and lifeless hallways. And even when you get to the second half where you enter a gigantic safe, it doesn't really change for the better. It's a more interesting set piece, sure, but it just starts off an annoying fetch quest where it's go grab codes for the passwords, and then rinse and repeat that over and over again until you reach the treasure. I will say though, that the boss of this level does actually save it from being a complete piece of trash. Kaneshiro, even in the original version, was always pretty fun to fight, just considering how ridiculous it all was. He turns into a fly, you beat the shit out of him, and then he enters a gigantic piggy robot. While it is kind of the same in Royal as well, I do enjoy the addition of him summoning enemies to fight you in the form of basically paying for them to show up. It's a fun addition that allows them to play into Kaneshiro's insane wealth, a lot more than just a few rooms that you see it in. Oh Shido, what you could have been. The Shido level stands out for me for being far less awful than Okumura's or even Kaneshiro's. As compared to those palaces, there are some things I like about this level a lot. The idea of it being a luxury cruise ship is really fun, the Akechi stuff is one of the best parts of the entire game, and the boss fight is pretty good, especially the addition that Royal added where it's the one-on-one section. So what places it this lowly? Well, it comes down to 2 major things. First and foremost is, of course, that stupid mouse section. I've always hated when games rip away all the items and abilities you have for the sake of making a section feel quirky and add on some artificial difficulty. And no, Yusuke's puns don't save it, no matter how charming they are. The second problem is the length of the whole thing. This whole level feels like it was two palaces packed into one, and not in a good way. Sections of constant cutscenes and running around to find the next area, or item to enter the next area, get really tiresome. Adding on to several mini-bosses you battle throughout, and you've got a level that drags on for way longer than it's needed to, which is a damn shame considering this would have been a lot higher if it just didn't have those problems. There's a lot of positives I have for the final dungeon in the game. The level really captures that dark feeling of you being the last chance this world has. The boss fights are all amazing, outside of the Holy Grail, of course. And several of the lore dumps and twists are incredible. So why is it so low on the list if I'm giving it all this praise? Well, about that. Every single one of the praises I have for the Mementos Dungeon have to do solely with its second half. The first half is probably some of the most forgettable stuff I've gone through in my recent JRPG memory. I despise the Okumura Palace with a passion, but at the very least I can recall some of the enemies there, even if it's for the sole purpose of complaining like an old man who has those annoying kids playing in his yard. But here I've just got nothing. There are some returning characters in the final dungeon that service the plot, sure, and we also get some lore about Morgana, but A, these characters only show up to drop a couple cryptic lines to foreshadow the end, and B, I gotta be honest, I never really liked Morgana all that much. I more or less tolerated him and his story in comparison to everybody else. So these reveals just felt like a bunch of padding moments, even more so when the reveals in the second half of the dungeon are arguably bigger and more interesting to me overall. Alright, now it's time to get to the palaces where things are much more positive than negative. Now I gotta be honest, from a visual standpoint, Futabas is probably one of the most visually striking levels in the entire game. Hell, in one of the more recent JRPGs I've played, the idea of raiding an old pharaoh's tomb to help save the heart of a broken teenager is so unique in comparison to just stealing the heart of a corrupt adult, and is an awesome change of pace. And the level design itself is actually pretty damn good. From a lot of elevation to constantly new things to look at and interact with, and even with the bits of backtracking that are in the level, they're barely noticeable considering they're all tightly woven together as well as they are. So what keeps this level lower than the others that are left on this list? Well, as fun as this level is, the boss is really what holds it back. The boss is one of the single most annoying boss fights I've battled in a Persona game. It's such an absolute pain in the ass to have to rely on the same ballista mechanic over and over again to actively deal any damage whatsoever. You can handle pretty much every other boss fight in the game without the need to over-rely on the sabotage mechanic. Why is this one so important? The only other ones that are mandatory are Sae and that stupid Holy Grail boss. But those are just things you do like once. In this you have to constantly do this in order to make any leeway whatsoever. I really wish this was just a one and done moment instead of just a constant thing over and over. Also, fuck those Anubis enemies. Next in our list is the game's first ever dungeon in the form of Kamoshida's Palace. Now, Kamoshida's Palace itself honestly has little to no faults whatsoever. It has cool looking enemies, it looks awesome, and has some really interesting puzzles. And it has one of my favorite boss fights in the series. Kamoshida was such a smug, arrogant piece of shit that crushing him under your heel as hard as you possibly can is so goddamn satisfying it's hard to put it into words. So why is it lower than a couple of the other ones when I have such high praises for it? Well, this level sadly comes down to the fact that it is cursed by it being the first level you go through, which means it is stuck with the constant slew of tutorial after tutorial, teaching you how to do every single goddamn thing. Plus, this is the level where you get your whole party, meaning you have to constantly stop so you can get their big moment, fight the mini-boss, and then leave and come back a couple days later to continue on. Which, while these moments are really badass, kills the pacing of the level really hard. Thankfully, it does get less and less frequent the more you traverse through said level, but that beginning section really drags it down. It's a fantastic level that's sadly held back for being the obligatory tutorial level. Now it is time for the one and only counterfeit thief Madarame. Now, to be totally honest, I don't really have a lot of major problems with this level as a whole. It looks phenomenal from a visual standpoint. It's a good amount of length with these very interesting puzzles sprinkled throughout. A personal favorite of mine is when you go through the art pieces to find the correct path to the doorway. It's got some cool enemies to battle, and there are no real areas that I felt like were too bullshit. Hell, they even made the boss fight of this place actually fun, instead of just a rinse and repeat of the painting fights that you did in the original version. So, what keeps it from being on the top if I'm being so damn positive about it? It's a minor amount of nitpicks that hold it back, really. From the times they force you to stop exploring in order to have a plot moment. It's not horrid, but it does get kind of annoying. And secondly is Madarame himself. I do love that they wrote him as this irredeemable piece of garbage that's nowhere near as redeemable as some of the others on this list. But at the same time, maybe it's because I'm not an artist, but I couldn't really feel it click with me all that well. Maybe if I was an artist, it would feel more strongly about his counterfeiting ways. But it just wasn't interesting to challenge him as much as the others on this list. Like, the only time I really felt like it was good to beat his face in was when it was revealed that he let Yusuke's mom die, but that's like right before you fight him. It really just comes down to a personal preference. I just found crushing Kamoshida and a lot of the other scumbags on this list a lot more fun. The number 2 spot is going to have to go to what was actually my absolute favorite palace in the original Persona 5. Everything about this level just clicks for me personally, from its awesome design to its great enemies, to the fact that this is the level where you actually get a Kechi to join your party, and who doesn't love that? He's not only a great party member, but his twist reveal at the end of the palace where he shows that he's made millions in order to show up the cheating Shadow Sae, that was harder to say than I thought it would be. In fact, another factor that I'm going to gush about that goes towards making this palace so great is that, like Futaba, you aren't really dealing with someone who is evil. You're battling a troubled person with the very system trying to make Sae turn you into the demons you aren't. It's such an engaging twist on the formula. That's only done one other time after this, but we will get to him in a moment, and trust me, I have positives about him. Also, I love the boss fight here. Not only is the special action a one and done thing once you figure out Sae is cheating in the fight, but once you reach the second half of the battle, she changes the roulette board to be landing on it gives her a special ailment attack. I guess ailment's not the best word, weakness or ability? I'm not totally sure. Either way, she gets a special attack that she can now use on your party. And let me tell you, that shit will keep you on your toes. It's actually so intimidating, but at the same way, so interesting. Man, I could go on and on and on about it, but it is something that I hope to see in more boss fights. The ability to have a boss just pull out some crazy super move that keeps you on your toes more is so goddamn cool. We're finally here, ladies and gentlemen. The all-new palace that was added into Royal for the 3rd semester. And man oh man, what a masterpiece of a palace it was. Everything, and I mean everything, from the level design, to the new enemies, to the new party member Kasumi. Every single thing about this boss fight just clicks. And more than anything else about it, the main enemy of this palace, Maruki, is the single best part of it. Just like Sae, Maruki is far less a villain and more along the lines of someone in the middle ground. His actions of keeping everyone in the false reality he created isn't out of greed, lust, or power, but more a desire to make everyone on Earth no longer feel any sort of pain. It's a very engaging and just downright fascinating thing to explore as you make your way through the 3rd semester. as you see everybody with their happy lives. Everything is perfect, but at the same time, you can't help but think to yourself, is this truly the right way to go? To forsake the fate we so fought for so everyone can be happy? It's a very interesting thing that they throw at you, and it really makes you think in comparison to everybody else. Not to say that Maruki is a completely good person. I don't want to seem like I'm super hyping him up as like the second coming or anything. He does some pretty shitty stuff. He manipulates Kasumi into helping him keep up the false reality, and later on the protagonist by revealing that destroying this false reality will kill Akechi, causing him to lose his rival and, even if he doesn't want to admit it, friend. Also, quick side note, I fucking love how Akechi is portrayed in the third semester. He doesn't have any pretense of just saying he's some good detective prince or tricking someone into thinking he's nicer than he is. He's an arrogant, twisted little asshole that is just so satisfying to watch. And best of all was that boss fight. Very few boss fights had me as invested as the Maruki fight did. Things like him interacting with your party members to convince them that this reality is right when they are willing to fight against him for it. To him altering reality itself with his persona to lock away things like using attacks or even healing. And that final fist fight between him and the protag made me bawl like a baby when I first ever saw it. You can really tell how much effort they put into this final semester. And it's all those things and more why I truly believe Maruki's Palace is the best palace in Persona 5 Royal. And that is the end of the list, everyone. Thank you all so much for watching. This was a blast to make and I really enjoyed working on it. I hope you enjoyed the last Persona 5 Royal video I'm going to make for a bit. And if you want to continue with me on our journey through more Persona games and other sorts of JRPGs, make sure to like and sub, and I'll see you all next time. Have a wonderful day.